Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, 7 lines from the top. The Gemara had already established the principle that we had mentioned more than once. In regards to Peiros Shavis, so long as those Peiros, that species, is situated still in the Sada where the Chayos can eat them, then a person can eat them in his house and feed them to his behema, his domesticated animal. However, once that species is no longer available to the chaya in the sadeh, it no longer can be eaten in the house as well. The Gemara now brings other times in regard to the beer of the Peiros Shvi. Says the Gemara, bring the Brisa Tana Rabbanon. Oichlin ba'anovim asher yichlu dolyo shel oichel. You can continue to eat grapes until the vines are finished, are completed in the area called Oichel, where they have a lot of grapevines. However, if there are still others available, then you can continue to eat the grapes. You can continue to eat gzeisim until the end of the zeisim are found in the area of Takua, where they had a lot of olives. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer Gush Cholov. He said where they completed and were completely finished in the area of Gush Cholov, where they had a lot of zeisim as well. To the point where a poor person would go out to try to seek out some olives. He wouldn't find them. He wouldn't find a shear of a roiva of a kav, which is 6 beitzim, in a tree, in a zayas tree, not on the branches and not on the ikaroi of the tree. You can continue to eat the dried figs until they are complete. They are no longer found in the area of Pag and Beis Hini, where they have these types of figs that are growing in the Beis Hini. Or Rabbi Yehuda objects to the last statement in the Brisa. Lo huzkaru pnei Beis Hini ela le'inyan meiser. When was Beis Hini mentioned? Not in regards to the fruits, in regards to be mevarer the Peiros Shavis, but rather in regards to meiser. Pagi Beis Hini v'ahini the toivino chayavim b'meiser. So you cannot use that as a measurement to determine when is the beer of the Peiros Shavis of these types of dried figs. The Brisa continues, Oichlin b'tmorim ad sheyichla achar shebetzoyar. You can continue to eat dates until they are completed. Until they are completed to the end of the area of Tzoyar. This we saw earlier. Tzoyar was in the region of Yehuda of Eretz Yisrael. Tzoyar is where they had a lot of tmarim, of dates. So therefore, he says, until they are completed in the area of Tzoyar, where they have so many date trees. Rabbi Shem Gamliel Oimer, Oichlin al shel bein hakipin, vein oichlin al shel bein hashitzin. Rabbi Shem Ben Gamliel argues and he says, even if you have some dates that are left over, it's only going to be if it's left over between the branches where it's accessible to the chayos. But if it's between the thorns of the date trees, then that's not considered to be accessible, whereby that is not considered to be the time where you can still eat them. Now the Gemara brings another brisa to ask on what we just quoted. V'raminhu oichlin ba'anovin ad Pesach. Here it states you can eat the grapes until Pesach. Bezeisim it says ad ha'atzeres. Begroigres ad ha'chanukah. B'tmorim ad ha'purim. Ve'om Rabbi Bibi, Rabbi Yochanan tarti basraisa machlif. Rabbi Yochanan, he switched the latter to that which we said in this brisa, that Groigres is until Chanukah and Tmarim is until Purim. He switches around. He says Tmarim is till Chanukah and Groigres is until Purim. But Al Kaponim, we're left with a question. We see that there are different measurements, different amounts, the time when you can still then eat these fruits, whereby you don't have to mevar them yet. Answers the Gemara, Idi v'idi chad shi'urahu. It's really the same shiur. When above in the first brayso we stated, for example, the anovim can be eaten until they are still growing the vines in the area of Oicha where they have a lot of grapevines. That is the typical shear until Pesach. V'ibois emo ha'ketoni behedya im yesh mu'ucharas mehen oichlin aleim. Or alternatively, you can answer that indeed, which it stated in the brayso, it said, when is it going to be something can still eat it? So let's say, for example, in the case of the anovim, it said, ad sheyichlu d'lo yishal oichel. But then it added, im yesh mu'ucharas, if there are still other ones that are still going to be available, mehen oichlin aleim, you can still continue to eat the grapes. And that's what it's referring to over here as well. So it's not a steer in the brises, because this brise that says until Pesach is referring to that time. Tanya, the Gemara brings another brisa. This is unrelated to what we just said, but once we're talking about different fruit trees, now we're going to speak about different trees, or amongst them, different trees in the brisa. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, he says the following: Simin leharim, a sign to determine what is considered to be mountain area. Milin, that's when you have golnut trees that are growing on these harim. Then it's going to be considered to be a har, a real viable har. We're going to understand what is the nafkamina soon. Simin la'amokim dekolim, the sign that is considered to be valleys. That is, if it's dekolim, that you have dekel trees, that means palm trees that are growing in that vicinity, then it's considered to be true valleys. Again, we'll describe what is the nafkamina shortly. Simin l'nacholim, what's considered to be necholim, those flowing waters that are considered to be a gather of a nachal. That's kanim, when you have kanim reeds that are growing alongside. Simin l'shvela shikma, a simin for a plain, 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 referring to the plain of a long area of ground, of land. That's when you have shikma, you have sycamore trees. So now Gemara explains, on the latter part that we just mentioned, simin l'shvei l'shikma, even though Rabbi Shimon Gamliel does not have a proof for that, but zeicher l'dovar, there is a zeicher in the following posuk. It states, Vayiten HaMelech es hakesef b'Yushalayim, referring to Shlomo HaMelech, ke'avonim, he put on the streets of Yushalayim the silver just as if they were stones. That's how wealthy. Ves ha'arozim nosan kishkomim asher b'shvelo l'roif. And he placed the cedar trees and the sycamore trees to the abundance of the plains. So now the Gemara explains what is the nafkamina for all of these things that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is teaching us. Simin leharim milin. He said the sign for something to be true mountainous area, that is if you have golnut trees growing there. Simin la'amokim dekolim. The sign that is true valleys is if you have the dekel tree that are growing there. Nafkamina lebikurim. The nafkamina, the practical halachic difference, will then pertain to the bikurim fruit, the first fruit that one who owns a field in Eretz Yisrael and the first fruit grows on those trees will have to bring from those first fruits, if they're the shiva minim, to Yushalayim, put on the mizbech, and ultimately give it to the kohen. The Slad says in the Mishnah, Ein mevin bikurin ela mishivas hamin. You must bring bikurim only from the shivas haminim, the 7 minim that Eretz Yisrael is praised with. V'lo midekolim shebaharim, but not from those dates that come from the dekel tree that are in the mountains, because that's considered to be inferior. V'lo bepeiros shebamokim, and also not of the tfuah, let's say the wheat and the barley that grow in the valleys, because that's also considered to be inferior. Simin l'necholim kanim. What did Hashem Gamliel come to teach us when it comes to the sign of a nachal? Excuse me. Are kanim that grows reeds alongside them. Nafkamina l'nachal eson. Nachal eson, the Torah tells us, if you find a dead body, chalila, in between two cities, the one that is closer to the city, the elders, the chachamim of that city, bring a calf to the Nachal Eson, to the flowing river of the Nachal Eson, and they decapitate a egel, called an egla arufa. So it has to have the requirement that it's a nachal. What's nechshav? What's defined as a nachal? Sim is going to be if it grows reeds inside of it. If it doesn't have reeds growing alongside, it's not considered to be a nachal that you can do egla arufa by. Sim in the shvola shikma. The shvela shikma. In what way is the simin for plains to be that grow sycamore trees? Nafkamina lemekach umemkar. If somebody sells a person a plain, an area of land, and it doesn't specify, then it's only going to be a valid sale if it has sycamore trees. Now the Gemara says, Hashed da osis lahachi. Once you have then explained that the nafkamina for shvela is shikma, and that is because of mekach umemkar. So then says the Gemara, then kulunami lemekach umemkar. Then all of the above aforementioned will also have the nafkamina mekach umemkar. And therefore, for example, when it says a person is selling an area of the valley, and it doesn't specify, that it must be that it has dekolim, it has dekel trees, otherwise not considered to be a valid sale. The Gemara now quotes the following Mishnah. The Mishnah states, in regards to different minhagim, makom shenahagu limkor behema daka lenachrim moichin. In a place where there are noyheg to sell a behema daka, for example, sheep, goats, then he can sell it. Makom sheloi nahagu limkor ein moichin. But in a place where they do not have the minhag to sell behema daka, why? Because they're concerned you might come to sell a behema gasa, which is a ox, or a donkey, or a horse, and everybody agrees you cannot sell a behema gasa to a ovei kechavim. So too, therefore, if they have the minhag not to sell a behema gasa, behema daka, because you might come to sell a megasa, then you cannot sell a behema daka either. That's the minhag. Ubekol makom, like the Mishnah now says, ein moichin lahem behema gasa. Everybody agrees you cannot sell a behema gasa. Now, what's the reason for you can't sell a behema gasa? Because since a behema gasa typically is used for work, for example, an ox, so therefore, if you were to sell an ox to an ovei kechavim, so you might come to also either lend or to maskir, to rent out the ox, whereby when the ovei kechavim uses that for malacha on Shabbos, you'll be over shvisas behemta, because it's still your behema. So therefore they made a gezerah, you cannot sell behema gasa to ovei kechavim. The Mishnah goes on to say, included in this gezerah is agolim v'syachim, even though they're young and they don't do malacha. The egel is a calf, the syachim is a young chamor, but nonetheless they will then have the same gezerah that you might come to then sell that which is considered to be a cow or a chamor, a donkey, who does do malacha. Shlomim ushvurim, same thing. Not only if it's complete, but even if it's broken, because again, even if it's broken, it doesn't do malacha, you might come to sell those that are shlemim. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvur. However, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda is choylek, and he's matir b'shvura. He is not concerned about shvur, because since the ovei kechavim does not maintain the shvur in his possession, he shechs it right away, so it's not a gezerah. Ben Beseira matir besus. Ben Beseira, he says, besus you could sell. It's a behema gasa. And we said a behema gasa normally is problematic to sell, because you might come to maskir, a mashil, to a ovei kechavim, and therefore be over the malacha of shvisas behemto. However, there's a machloikis over here. If you say that when the sus, which is normally bringing a person, is carrying a person, is that considered to be a malacha deraisa or not? And over here, when it comes to a person, it's not a malacha deraisa. But what when it comes to an animal? Let's say a hunter is carrying a bird to hunt an animal, and therefore, while he's carrying the bird on the horse, is that considered to be a malacha or not? The Tanna Kama says yes, and therefore it's aser. Whereas Ben Meseira argues and said that's also not going to be a malacha deraisa. The Mishnah continues, other minhagim makom shenagu lechol tzli belele Psachim. Those who have the minhag to eat roasted meat on leil Psachim, oichlin, they can do so. Whereas places that have the minhag not to eat basar tzli cannot eat it. What would be the concern to have a eating basar tzli, since the night of Pesach is when we eat the korban Pesach, which has to be tzalui, has to be roasted, and you cannot eat the roasted korban Pesach outside of Yerushalayim. So the concern over here would be that a person who would eat basar tzli on Leil HaSeder would be implying that he's eating from the roasted meat of a korban Pesach outside of Yerushalayim. So there's different minhagim, and therefore the Mishnah says it depends on the minhag. Says the Gemara Amar of Yehuda Marav, on the latter part of the Mishnah we just discussed now in regards to the minhag of eating basar tzli on Leil HaSeder. Osur loy la'odem sheyomar basar zeh lePesach. In regard to this, says Rav Yehuda, the name of Rav, that a person cannot have meat, even if it's meat now that's been shechted, and the meat cannot be then declared this is meat for Pesach. It appears that he's sanctifying the meat and he's eating the kachim bachutz outside of Yerushalayim. So therefore, even saying the basar is basar for Pesach, that's prohibited, says Rav. Says the Gemara, Amra Pape, Davke basar, aval chiti loy. That's only when it comes to basar. But if it's wheat, certainly there's no problem to say the chitin of Pesach. Why? The minta lepischa kamar, because everyone understands he's only coming to then shomer that wheat for Pesach, and therefore there's not such a concern. There's no concern whatsoever that he's just talking about being shomer, that he's putting away this chitin for Pesach. But we don't look at it as if he's going to then sell it or use it for a korban Pesach, that he was makdish for a korban Pesach, and therefore he's using that money that was sanctified. Says the Gemara, Ubasar loy, the Gemara asks, Rav Yehuda Marav said, you cannot say this basar is for Pesach. You can't? Ask the Gemara, Meisveh, we have a brayso that seems to imply the otherwise. Rabbi Yossi said, Toidus ish roimi, there was a person, a distinguished Jewish personality named Toidus from Rome. He lived in the area of Rome. Hinig es bnei roimi le'echol gedim mekulasim b'lei Psachim. He instructed the people of Rome to eat the basar of a gedi that was roasted the way a korban Pesach would be roasted. That means in its entire body with the roshoi, the krov, and the al kirboy, like the korban Pesach is put into a skewer and roasted in its completion. He would tell people that's how they should then roast their meat on Leil HaSeder as a way to remember the korban Pesach. Sholchu loy, the Chachamim sent him a message. Ilmole toidos ad, if you weren't such a distinguished personality called toidos, that's your name. Gazarnu alecha nidui, we would excommunicate you. Sha'at ma'echil es Yisrael kachim bachutz, because you're feeding Klal Yisrael kachim outside of Yerushalayim. Ask the Gemara, kachim sal kedaitach. Is it indeed feeding kachim bachutz? It's not kachim at all. Elo'ema, rather, we're on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis at the top. Elo'ema koroiv la'achil es Yisrael kachim bachutz. It's close to feeding Klal Yisrael kachim that is outside of Yerushalayim. In other words, it has the resemblance of such. And therefore now the Gemara asks its question, mikulas in, she mikulas loy. When it was a problem, was it mikulas? When it was roasted in its entirety, just as a korban Pesach is. But if it was not mikulas, then not. The Gemara makes the following distinction. Omre mikulas, if they said when it was mikulas, then lo shna amar, lo shna ola amar. Whether they said it's for Pesach or not, it would be problematic because it would already resemble a korban Pesach. Whereas she'ein mikulas, if it's just meat, then it depends. Pirash ein, lo pirash lo. If they described it for being for Pesach, then it's a problem. But if they didn't say anything, they're just using the meat, then it's not a problem. And that's the distinction what Rav Yehuda Amarav said. If it's going to meat that you have, even if it was already shechted, and you're going to say, this is for Pesach, then that's going to be prohibited.